Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, then my name is Rosie and I am a recent graduate of the University of Oxford. Today's video is a really requested one, how I got a first on my dissertation and what universities are looking for in order to give a first out for a dissertation. I didn't write my own dissertation too long ago. It was submitted in March 2019. It is this. And I got a 75 out of 100 on my dissertation, and it has also been nominated for a Quaternary Research Association Undergraduate Dissertation Prize. I will find out the results of that in January, but for now it is an
award-nominated Oxford University First Class Dissertation.
And I'm never going to stop telling everyone that because I am so proud of it. In order to make this video as kind of informative as possible, I have been researching different mark schemes for dissertations for universities across the country. I've got York, Sheffield, Nottingham and Manchester. I didn't actually get Oxford's because I can't access it anymore and I can pretty much remember what was on it. I spent so long reading it last year that most of the advice that I give that isn't directly from someone else's mark scheme is from the Oxford mark scheme. Just on that note, if you're revising for anything or writing anything, looking at the mark schemes for things is such a good way of making sure that you are on the right track. There is absolutely no point doing all this revision and writing essay after essay if you don't look at mark schemes to see if you're actually, including everything that they want. So, just a side tip.
Hot Scottish, French, Italian, a little bit Dane, but 100% party animal.
The structure is at the top of every single mark scheme that I could find, and on Manchester's mark scheme it said to get into the 80s and 90s you need to have a coherent, polished and fluent structure. So a coherent macrostructure is referring to the title and overarching sections of your dissertation, including headings, subheadings, references and appendices. Now these are kind of like the skeleton of your dissertation, and when I was writing mine I made sure that I kind of had an overall document where I'd written out every section that I planned on having at the beginning. Whether or not I continued all of those sections through, this is what I planned to have done, and it meant that I did have a skeleton that I could follow, and it really helped me personally because it meant that I wasn't just kind of throwing ideas left, right and centre, and I could actually plan out when I was going to attack different sections, what research I needed for different sections. It just basically helped me to formulate a more coherent idea of what I was actually going to do, because a dissertation is hard. So the coherency and the fluency of your overall structure does translate down to the lower first class points, which is kind of where I was sat in 75. (70 to 90 on Manchester's list says that it is lacking polish. To get to this polished stage, you would have to be redrafting lots and lots of times. I drafted my chapters individually, so I didn't wait until I'd got a whole thing before I sent it off. And I know for me that would have made me panic because I wouldn't have had the feedback along the way that I needed to make sure I was on the right track. So what I did is, essentially whenever I'd written quite a lot, I would send it to my supervisor and he would look through it, be like, this is what I don't think should be in here. I think these should go the other way around. I think this should be in this section, not this section. And that really helped me then to adjust the plans that I had got ready in terms of the skeleton that I've discussed, and also just working out how much I needed to still do in my time. Every dissertation should have an abstract which makes up part of the general structure. According to the University of Bristol, an abstract should be concise, outline the main aims of the study, methodology, findings and conclusions, and that is written as one of the most important parts of the microstructure of the dissertation, which is essentially like the contents of every small section. This is my abstract. It's about a page, and then I have acknowledgements at the bottom. As you can see, it is double spaced and clearly not that long. It shows the reader kind of a general outline of what you're doing. It needs to present your main argument clearly, concisely, and also show your most impressive or main conclusion in very few words.
I'm sure you've heard the Stone Age occurred for 2.5 million.
An introduction of a dissertation or thesis is completely different to one in an essay. What I mean by this is that an introduction in an essay is usually only a paragraph. It is kind of 200-250 words max, and kind of sums up what you're doing. An introduction in a dissertation varies depending on what you're writing about, what style you're writing for. Mine was long. It starts here and it goes all the way. Keep going. Keep going. To here. 16 pages of introduction. If I remember rightly, my introduction was about 4,500 words. I panicked. My supervisor said, no, it's perfect for your work. Mine had to introduce the geography of where like my main argument was set. I had to introduce the people that I was talking about in my dissertation. I had to introduce where I got my data from, and also the main kind of key background information as to why I've chosen this topic area. And finally, how my dissertation would be useful for future study by anyone who wanted to use it. Now this, I think, is one of the most important things that you should be doing with your dissertation, making sure that the research is going to be useful in the future, and presenting this in your presenting this in your introduction as confidently as possible. Sheffield University have written that their top class dissertations should situate the topic confidently within the wider literature, and this should be done in the introduction. It's essentially, you sum up the research that's already been done, and then you place yours where you think it should go amongst the wider literature, why it's useful, why it facilitates them, and kind of why you've ended up with that research topic from these other texts that you've introduced. Similarly, Manchester explains that you should have a range of literature cited. Again, introduce them all in the introduction and explain why you've chosen those main pieces and how it links to your work. The University of Nottingham's Sociology and Social Policy Department has also said that their top class work needs to be individual, unique and imaginative. Again, your own ideas, developing new ways that research can be kind of twisted on its head, or even brand new research that just has not been done before. Either way, whether you choose to kind of further someone else's study or completely start your own, it has to be in a way that is imaginative, creative, and builds upon already useful information. Your work is being written to be used by future scholars. If you go in with the mindset that this needs to be good enough, new enough, that people in the future use my work as a reference point, you will be on the right track. This section is probably where you're going to need the most help from your supervisor, because there will be a lot of things that you've not come across before, such as statistics if you're doing a humanities degree. I had never done statistics, and yet I think because I did them, that's how I got into the first class category, because not enough archaeology and anthropology dissertations do include statistics, so mine was kind of higher than the rest, if that makes sense. Now my materials and methods chapter started off like this, and essentially you're talking about where you got your data from, why you chose that method, any calculations that you might have done. As you can see here, I have lots of different calculations, and how you present your tables and photos is also part of your mark. For example, the University of Manchester says their first class dissertation should have an intelligent and creative use of figures. Now this is where I have introduced my use of statistics in the methods section. For example, I've got the calculations that I've used in order to do a t-test and a chi-square test. These were really important in getting the grade that I did because it showed that I had in-depth understanding of what techniques I needed to use in order to apply the knowledge that I've gathered to my actual question in order to make a conclusion. Next up is the results section, which leads us nicely on to our analysis section of this video.
Everyone thinks they know the story of Dick Turpin's highway glory, but my past is...
Any dissertation should have a findings or results section where you are only presenting what you have found and you are not analysing them or explaining what this means. So the section should be kind of descriptory, like I am literally just presenting what I found in some graphs and explaining the graphs and explaining what my testing told me. So here, look, I've talked about a t-test and I have footnotes on these pages to explain further what things mean, and all of that presentation comes into what Manchester was talking about, an appropriate use of figures, imaginative use of figures. If you have far too much data to put in the results section like I did, you can use an appendix right at the end and put in all of your hundreds of tables that you spend hours and hours over Christmas making.
Okay.
Once you've presented your results and you've analysed them in terms of pulling out stats and general patterns, you can move on to your discussion. This is the fun bit.
I'm William the Conqueror, my enemy stood no chance. They call me the...
A first class discussion section should tie the whole thing together. It is your most important section because it is where you can argue why your knowledge is so important, what it means, what patterns in the results might tell you, and again how it is going to be useful in the future. Now, all of your literature and your sources should have been brought in the introduction, and what all of these mark schemes have been saying is that you shouldn't be bringing new information up in the discussion. My discussion wasn't too long, it was actually shorter than my introduction, but all of the sections that I split it into in my subtitles were titles made from points drawn in the introduction and bits that I had already said that I was going to explain and talk about in the introduction. Using my dissertation as an example, in the introduction I had said that certain factors will affect the growth of long bones in children, and they would be genetic affinity, geographical and latitudinal affinity, nursing, weaning and early diet, and also just general stunting in childhood and adolescence. All of these things were brought up during my introduction, and they were brought up because a lot of literature was already done on those topics, and tying them together is how kind of I chose my research interest, and that is why my intro was so long. But because I had such a long introduction, it meant that I could create, for example, separate sections assessing whether or not all of my hypotheses about these different things were correct based on my own results. The discussion is not the conclusion is a separate section. However, your conclusions should start to be drawn in terms of responding to your hypotheses and assessing whether or not you've kind of gone the right way about doing things, if there was any problems, why that might be. They aren't a recount of everything you did or an evaluation of your work, but they should be critical and evaluative in terms of how you have utilised specific sources, why, and whether or not previous findings actually work alongside yours. And finally is your conclusion.
Won't be the first to blink. I'm not who you think. Don't mess with me.
Now by this point, you finish the discussion and you feel like it's all done and over, but it's not. You still have to tie up all of your findings and analysis into what Liverpool explains should be a well-justified, organised and argued conclusion. My conclusion was only a page and a bit. I'm pretty sure it was only around 200 words. It looks like this. It starts here. I've discussed my main aims at the start, explained in one sentence kind of what my methods were, and then gone on here to answer whether my hypotheses were correct. And lastly, on the next page, I've summed up in one paragraph how my study helps the discipline and how it can continue to help further study. The main point that you need to hit in your dissertation is to write out your main aim and your main method, whether your hypotheses were met, whether new things came out that you didn't expect, and then what is going to happen with this research in the future, why is it useful. Those 6 things should essentially be the basis of your entire dissertation, but the conclusion is a little microcosm of your entire dissertation, so it's easier to sum it up there. And then you are done. Unless you haven't done your references yet, and in which case I'm so sorry. Ideally your references should be separated into books, journals and websites and contributions to books, i.e. like chapters that you've used. My references took up a lot of pages. And then I have my appendix, but every university has different regulations for what your bibliography and references should look like, and therefore you need to check your own marking conventions for that. But just make sure that you haven't missed any and that every single reference you have put into your dissertation appears here. There is a tool on Microsoft Word that means you can add references to a main reference bank at the end as you go along. There's also software that I haven't used but definitely exists, and that might help you. As you saw, my appendix came after my references, and your appendix is basically a section for any data or quotes or images that are necessary, emphasis on necessary, to getting your point across and proving that you have actually done kind of all of the work and the calculations, but wouldn't fit in the main body of text. At the front of your dissertation you should also have a list of figures and a list of tables, and these all contribute to the structure, the overall structure, and it needs to be presented nicely and coherently, as every single one of these mark schemes has said. And that is the end of this video. I hope that this actually kind of made some sense and has helped clear things up about writing a dissertation, about what universities actually want from a dissertation and getting the top marks. If you have any questions, please write them in the comments. I've definitely not covered everything. I just wanted to fit as much as possible into one video, so there's 100% things that I've missed. You can DM me on Instagram or leave me a comment. As I said, give me a thumbs up and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. I will see you in my next video. Bye!